put in the caveat that this is the information we have. The problem is that there doesn't seem to be any verified national database that has all the existing and proposed data centers in it. So this is just the information that we have right now, but you can see that there's a lot, and it tends to be right now concentrated in the Chicago metro area, but we know that there's proposals for lots of them all over the place. So for this event, we're going to have 3 speakers today. One is to give a general inspirational statement. One person is going to be talking about data centers, what's happening on the state level, and one person is going to be talking about what's happening on the local level. So the way in terms of how we'd like to keep this meeting organized is when the speakers are speaking, we're going to ask that you put your questions in the chat and not raise your hand and speak out. And then what we'll do is we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentations. And then following that, we're going to be following up on with suggestions of what if you want to be active on the data center question, we'll follow up with ideas of what you can do about that. And after that, if you have any questions about Third Act as an organization, some of us will stay on at the end and we'll be there to answer any of your questions that you would have and let you know how you can become active with us. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Mike Johnson. Mike, do you want to wave or something? There he is. He is Third Act's Democracy Campaigns Manager. So that is the national position. And what he does is he focuses on mobilizing third actors to engage in our political process through coalition building, advocacy, and elections. With a background in municipal politics and public policy, Mike spent his career working with grassroots groups, organized labor, and independent political movements to build power from city hall to state legislatures and to win elections. And he's going to bless us with a inspirational statement right now.
Thank you, Maria. No problem. Appreciate it. I'm Mike Johnson. I live outside of Chicago in the community of Brookfield. And as Marty mentioned, I'm on the national staff at Third Act. I work as our Democracy Campaigns Manager. And I'm always glad to work with the really great folks at Third Act Illinois on the many things that they work on across the state. And so very happy to be here to talk. But I want to just share some, it was actually in our national Third Act newsletter, and the folks at Third Act Illinois wanted me to quickly read it here for you all, folks. I hope it's both inspirational and motivating in these very interesting times that we are living in. The start of 2026 has been a whirlwind. We recognize that the many displays of this administration's authoritarianism, violence against people in the street, the rising cost of living from healthcare to utilities, destructive attacks on our democracy, and the all-out assaults on our climate and environment are bound up in each other. We know that those powerful corporations that increasingly pollute our air and poison our water with data centers and fossil fuel extraction are the same ones bankrolling the creeping authoritarianism we see every day. It is in moments like this when I think about the struggles and fights that came before us. While most of you are familiar with one of Dr. Martin Luther King's most famous statements, by the way of the Unitarian minister Theodore Parker, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Many may not know that that line comes from a sermon that was given after the third and successful attempt to march from Selma to Montgomery. What is often left out is this reality. Not only that attempt, but the 2 previous attempts were marred by violence and intimidation. That is the truth of our work today, tomorrow, and the next day. The arc doesn't just bend, it must be bent by our collective work, actions, and beliefs, even in the face of tremendous hostility. We must remember all the great movements behind us that pushed and pulled despite not knowing how long the moral arc of the universe is. And neither do we as we fight this regime today. Regardless, we must continue. We must throw our shoulders into it because we are determined to see it bend towards justice. Thank you.
So thank you, Mike. These are serious words, I think, for serious times. And I think they help to ground us in what we're trying to accomplish in our work. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our second speaker, who is Kavi Chinham. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Kavi. She's the campaign manager for Illinois at Vote Solar, which is a national organization which advocates for clean energy in legislative and regulatory arenas at the state level. In this role, Kavi works to advance clean energy legislation and engages in coalitions to promote equitable and just measures. Prior to joining Vote Solar, she received her PhD in chemical engineering from Northwestern University. So we're very lucky to have her as a speaker today. Thank you, Kabi.
Thank you so much, Marty. Thanks for having me here today, y'all. Love third act. I love to say that I'm a future third actor, and I definitely feel that way every time I come to one of your events. And thanks, Mike, for really grounding us in this conversation. I think the through line of what we're working on at the state level is that data centers come from rich companies, wealthy people, wealthy corporations, and they have more than enough money and resources to be good neighbors. And if they're going to locate in our state, they should do that in a responsible way. Um, this is a big part of doing that. You can go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about what data centers are, how they relate to what everyone is talking about, artificial intelligence, how they specifically impact our energy, water, and air, and then what, as part of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, we are pushing for this spring in the Power Act. Next slide. So what are data centers? You can go to the next one. So a data center is a facility. It houses a bunch of servers, essentially. So if you imagine your laptop or your computer, it's a ton of these. They basically look like big black boxes, and they run really hot. So imagine like your laptop getting hot. They run really hot. They take up a lot of space as well. So it's not just things that exist online. They have to be stored, physically in chips, and have processors and things like that. Um, so data centers store a lot of data, as it sounds, but they also do a lot in terms of generative AI. If you go to the next one. So in a data center specifically, there are several things that are housed. So IT equipment, like I said, servers, infrastructure and utilities to actually run the servers. So, for example, uh, the wires that actually power the servers, connectivity, so Wi-Fi, and then physical security in order to keep these data centers secure because there is a lot of money that goes into them again, and there is a lot of personal and private data that's being stored. So there's a need for security, companies want. Yes, next slide. So I know we hear about it probably too much. I see billboards about it everywhere, and it's in every search engine you use. If you go to the next slide, some of the details about generative AI specifically, it's a newer type of AI that it actually learns on top of what it's doing and then creates new content. So if you've seen some of those really janky pictures online that are AI generated and have like third hands and things, that is generative AI. And it gets better because it keeps getting trained. And it gets trained by using data centers. Data centers, one of the reasons they use so much power is because these AI technologies and these programs need a lot of initial energy to run and become better at predicting and modeling and uh, eventually spitting out content that people ask for through ChatGPT or whatever more complex AI software. Next slide. So this was shown at the beginning, closer in Illinois, but this is just to really see the scope of how many data centers are popping up across the country. We have hundreds in Illinois already, and it is, you know, happening at such a rapid pace that we don't even really have a good track of how many are being built. But this website, it's public, anyone can access it. It's one of the better ones that are tracking how many data centers are coming online, which is helpful to see. Next slide. So I'm going to go through some of the impacts of data centers now. And for energy impacts, this is, how much electricity they use. Um, Next slide. And before I get into the impacts, I want to do like a very brief primer on how Illinois operates in the grand scheme of power in the country. So we are part of two regional transmission organizations, or RTOs, PJM and MISO. I live in Chicago, so I'm in PJM territory. They are responsible for balancing energy and supply, for taking on new capacity or supply in varying ways in order to do that balance. Capacity, the very short way of saying it is that it's supply. Um, and different sorts of generation have different capacity factors. So solar and wind, for example, have lower capacity factors because the sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing, so they aren't able to operate 100% of the time. When they're paired with storage, though, their capacity factors go up. So it's really important for our RTOs to have enough capacity for when there are what we call peak demand. So really hot summer days when everyone is running their air conditioning units, that is times of peak demand, and that is when we need to make sure that there is enough capacity to meet that peak demand. Next one. So every year, these RTOs hold capacity options in order to secure commitments. And how this is relevant to data centers is as we've seen projected demand from data centers, and we see that through interconnection requests from companies asking to get physically connected to the grid. As that has increased dramatically, that therefore makes the RTOs need to get a hold of even more capacity year after year. And we've seen that really skyrocket in the past year. Um, and so that's just become increasingly challenging. And you can see on the graphs here, the one on the bottom left is showing different growth scenarios. And you can see compared to the last 20 years how this is unprecedented, which is a word that is thrown around a lot, but it really is appropriate here. Next slide. So, concerns that we have with this unprecedented demand is that it is just going to add and, frankly, be the main catalyst of the energy affordability crisis. Um, Cost increases, we've already seen that happen over the summer last year. Grid infrastructure costs is another thing that comes about with data centers because they require, new substations to be built, new transmission lines to be built, other infrastructure in order to serve them at a faster rate than what we are used to. And the Union of Concerned Scientists came out with a really great report called Data Center Power Play. I highly recommend folks to read it. It's exciting. It's, maybe boring to read for some, but I found it really fun to read. But they found that ComEd customers in 2024, which was 2 years ago at this point, paid over $200 million for transmission costs. That is like on the charge on our utility bills. And that is only going to get even more with time as these data centers continue to come to the state. Next slide. And you can go to the next one too. So, water usage is another part of this. As I explained, data centers use servers, they house a bunch of servers. And like I said, your laptop is one example. So, it might get hot when you're using it, and then you stop using it for a minute and it cools down. Data centers are using servers that are huge and they get very, very hot and also are usually running for 24 hours a day. That means that they need to be cooled regularly. So there are these really interesting cooling systems that happen. The similar thing you might think of in like a nuclear reactor where there's like coolant around a really hot nuclear reactor because it gets hot when reactions are happening. Similarly, there's cooling water that goes through a data center and cools the servers. Um, and you might think like, okay, can it get reused? Yes, but there's also issues because cooling, water evaporates. So there is a rate of evaporation happening at the same time. with energy demand and workloads as we train more and more AI, water use also rises. And also, you can think of the water usage that comes indirectly from like power plants as well. This was kind of gut-wrenching statistic that I saw in a report, which is each 100-word AI prompt is estimated to use roughly one bottle of water. So you can just, multiply that times how much ever and think about just the volume of water that happens when these data centers are used. Okay, next slide. Some additional concerns around data centers. So we in Illinois in 2021 passed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which had really great goals for shutting down fossil plants and also goals for decarbonization and clean energy, implementing clean energy. The load growth presented by data centers means that Illinois could miss those goals because if fossil plants are forced to stay open for longer to make sure that people have power, then we aren't decarbonizing. There's also a lot of local impacts. So local air pollution, most data centers use backup diesel generators in order to work in case of emergencies, which can, diesel generators cause air pollution, and they're also very loud. There's a story in Aurora last November where there's a data center there, and uh, because we don't have the Power Act in law yet. Data centers were running their diesel generator for 3 days, and folks that live nearby were saying that it sounded like jet engines for 3 days straight, which is crazy. Next slide. So, data center policies. I think next slide. Okay, so specifically in Illinois, and I forgot to update these numbers for the Power Act. I can share them though. Oh, maybe I have them on my screen actually. So the Power Act was filed last week. It's House Bill 5513 and Senate Bill 4016. This is brought to you by the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. And we basically have three buckets of policies that we've created centered around energy, community, and water. And I'll go through these briefly. Next slide. So our energy provisions in this bill have basically three separate things. So the first one is that data centers have to, like I mentioned, there might be new substations, new transmission lines, just new infrastructure that has to be built to serve these. They are required to pay 100% of those costs. Right now, how our system works is that those costs are spread across all electricity consumers, and we want data centers to pay them. Like I said, they're rich. They have the money to do that. So we want to make sure the costs stay with them. The other part of this is that um, data centers will have to bring their own new clean capacity in order to receive service that is non-interruptible, which means that service can't be cut. Um, for example, if you have a 100 megawatt data center and they bring 60 megawatts of clean capacity, then they will receive firm service up to 60 watts. And then the other 40 megawatts will have to be curtailable. So if there are price spikes or brownouts or something or risks of those, then those 40 megawatts are curtailable. Flexibility is something we really want to promote here. It means that data centers are operating responsibly. So that's that part of the plan. And then the last part is that we have what we call a carrot, so fast load interconnection. So if they meet specific thresholds for energy capacity and backup generation, so like battery storage instead of diesel generators, then they are able to jump the queue ahead of other data centers that are less responsible and connect to the grid faster. Because they aren't straining the grid, they're helping strengthen it ultimately. And then we also have specific provisions in the Power Act for municipal utilities and electric cooperatives. Okay, next slide. For community impacts, we have several provisions that are really first in the country. Really, all of our policies are first in the country, which is very exciting. But one, I mentioned backup generators that are diesel and can run for 24 hours. That is what we passed. They snuck that in at the end of the Clean and Reliable Grid Affordability Act. We want to close that loophole and only allow them to run in emergency circumstances up to 4 hours. Emergency circumstances would mean like if the grid goes down, they're only allowed to run for 4 extra hours. We also are requiring cumulative impacts assessments, which will include like certain pollutants, other things that could negatively impact environmental justice communities. And if they are shown to be too burdensome, the Illinois IPA can rule that a data center can't locate within 3 miles of a EJ community or an equity eligible income community. Transparency is also a big thing with data centers. They don't have it right now and aren't required to have it. So this will require data centers, they won't be allowed to sign NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, and will also have requirements to sign and engage in communities with community benefits agreements. So that communities will have these kind of baseline protections and then can negotiate their own protections that a specific community might need. And then lastly, in putting their money where their mouth is, data centers have to pay into a public benefits and affordability fund. This will support low income bill assistance, full home retrofits, and also pay into environmental justice grants. So that will be in proportion to how big a data center's load is. Okay, next slide. And then the last part is water. So, like I said, transparency is a big issue with data centers. We simply don't even know how much they use. We just know that it's millions of gallons a day. So, this bill would require data centers to transparently report their expected and actual water uses, including where they're getting their water, which is very important. Excuse me. And then also do an assessment as to alternate ways of cooling. So, like I said, water evaporates, but they should still be able to reuse a lot of the water that they use in a closed loop. So, we want to make sure that they're required to look into those alternatives. Um, we'll also require the Illinois State Water Survey to use the data center's plan to model the anticipated impacts to shared water resources and also require permitting. So, all of this will further help communities and agencies figure out exactly when to stop data centers and when to curtail their water usage. It just gives us more information at the end of the day. Next slide. I think that's it. Yes, that is all I have. I saw a lot of questions in the chat. I think we're gonna wait for the end for questions. Um, but I can also answer in the chat. Yeah, thanks so much.
Marty, you're on mute.
That was a lot of information. I know people have a lot of questions about it, but I ask you just to be patient. And, we promise we'll get to them after Lori finishes her presentation. It's a really big issue and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So now we get to hear from Lori, who has been involved on a local level. I've known Lori, she's a member of Third Act as well as the Sierra Club and probably other organizations as well. But I really got to know her when I started paying attention to what was going on in Sangamon County and Springfield. And this woman is just like a dervish. I think that's a good word. I mean, she just is spinning, spinning, spinning and doing lots of really good organizing work. So we're really happy to have her here to let us know what's going on. She works with the Coalition for Springfield's Utility Future and Sustainable Springfield to address the growing impacts of data center development in Sangamon County, which is where Springfield is. And these organizations are working to address the impacts of data center growth and educate Springfield City Council on its role as the overseer of city water, light, and power, which is no easy task. And the goal of this is that their municipally owned utility will transition to clean energy. So, Lori, thank you so much for being here, and let's do it.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Marty. That was very nice. Thank you for the third act people for having me. And Covey, that was a great presentation. I learn so much every time I hear these presentations. So I'm Coalition for Springfield's Utility Future is a coalition here in Springfield made up of environmental groups. It's Sustainable Springfield, Third Act, Sierra Club. This is like naming the seven dwarfs for me. Faith in Place, Faith Coalition for the Common Good. We have Illinois Environmental Council. We have Citizens Utility Board. Yeah, those are all our volunteers. And then we have a couple of paid staffers from Sierra Club that are kind of like our advisors. So in the past several years, as Marty mentioned, we've primarily been working with City Water, Light and Power here in Springfield to work with the coal-powered plant. And then our data center proposal came up in October for Sangamon County, and we kind of shifted gears really quickly. So I don't have slides only because at this local level, the projects are so varied. Every data center project is different. The number of watts, the megawatts they're using is different. The number of diesel generators is different. So it's hard to put it on slides. But I'm going to start out talking about balancing the benefits and harm of the data center project. So I'm pro economic development. I'm pro union. I understand the valuable uses of AI. I have no problem with AI. I have concerns about the proliferation of data centers. It really seems as if the building capacity is much greater than the need at this point. And that's causing a lot of problems locally. So I'm dealing with local activists in many of the locations in Illinois who have proposed data center projects. So these are projects where permits have been filed, annexations have been requested, and these projects will be voted on before the Power Act ever gets implemented. So we're dealing with a lot of issues right now that the legislation isn't going to help. So, harms of data centers, Kavi mentioned transparency. That's a real difficult problem. There's not a lot of advance notice on these projects. These are massive projects. Kavi used the word unprecedented. I totally agree with that. These are so huge. But when they follow local regulations for notifications to residents, it's not enough time. So a city council typically has to put an agenda out 2 days in advance. A county board by state law has to give an agenda 15 days in advance. But when you hear of a data center project that's going to buy up hundreds of acres of land, ours in Sangamon County is going to be 1.5 million square feet of building surfaces, 100,000 square feet of parking lot, over 330 diesel backup generators. It's really hard to react to a project like that when you have 2 to 10 days notice. So the transparency is an issue. Disinformation is an issue. I've been to 3 presentations now by data center developers, and the presentations are always very simple presentations. This is going to be a great project. Your county, your city is going to benefit it. Nothing's going to go wrong. We aren't going to use a lot of water. There's always excuses for how good the project is going to be. So the first thing I want to mention is property values. So property values can be diminished from data center projects. Nobody wants to live by a data center. Ours here is rural. The farmers are concerned about the negative effects of lighting. Lighting can actually disrupt the circadian process of plants. So if you have green beans growing next to lights that are on 24 hours a day, it can affect the growing of the plants. So that when the data center developers are talking about that, they'll say, "Oh, our lighting will be fine, our generators won't be loud." So a lot of disinformation that really the people that live nearby adjacent to these properties need to understand that. There can be harms to health and definitely quality of life. The diesel generators that Covey mentioned there's a lot of emissions from that. There are acres of land, so prime farmland, when you're taking 200 or 300 acres of farmland and putting that much square footage of building space and parking lot space, that land can never be recovered for farming again. At least with solar farms, when they take them down, you can recover the land. With a data center, the land is gone. It'll be a brown space when it's done. But the main thing I want to talk about is the increase in electricity rates. I think that's what's most important to this group. Covey did a real good job of explaining the whole grid, the auction grid. So we had a presentation at our data center that said that this data center would not increase rates, which is really an accurate statement. One data center alone will not necessarily raise our electricity rates. But when you're adding the amount of data centers that we have in Illinois, I'm working with 3 counties and 5 cities that all have proposed data centers, anywhere from 100 megawatts to some of them are 600 megawatts. So when the demand for electricity goes up that high and that quickly, and the supply is not going up, that's when our rates can be affected. So that's a big issue for this group, I think. Now, the promised benefits, so I'm talking about balancing the benefits and the harm. The promised benefits are tax revenues, and in many cases, localities do get millions of dollars of tax revenues. My concern with that, our concern with that, is tax revenues can be appealed. A gas-powered plant in Jackson County down by Carbondale in 2022 appealed their tax assessments and had the value of their property reduced by 90% through this tax appeal process. The local school district lost 30% of their revenue when that tax appeal went. So tax revenues can be an issue. Jobs, the data center developers promise a lot of construction jobs, a lot of union jobs. So data centers can take years to build, and there are good construction jobs, but those are temporary jobs. The permanent jobs, they say like 100 jobs for a 600 megawatt data center. They aren't necessarily high paid IT jobs. In our particular case, Cyrus One is our developer. That's the same developer in Aurora that had the diesel generators running for 3 days because of their transformer went out. They have hubs. They have their technical hubs in Dallas and Aurora, Illinois, and one on the East Coast. And if you look at their careers page on their website, you will see that most of their high-paid tech jobs are based in one of those hubs or they're remote jobs. So for a rural location like us, the 100 jobs that they're promising are going to be janitorial, there'll be HVAC jobs, there'll be landscaper maintenance jobs, which aren't bad jobs. I mean, some of those can pay above minimum wage, but the data centers like to promise a lot of high-tech jobs that don't necessarily happen. And then the loss of jobs from AI really outweighs what you're getting out of the data center. I had an article, Catherine, I didn't know if I should share this with you today, but there's another article about Amazon laying off thousands of people at their warehouses because the AI technology is getting so sophisticated they don't need as many people. So we're creating temporary construction jobs and potentially 100 permanent jobs, but we're losing thousands of jobs from AI. So it doesn't balance out correctly. So responsible economic data center development should provide more benefits to the community than it does harm. So one of the jobs of elected officials is to push economic development, but it needs to be done responsibly. It's hard to stop data centers, so we need to make sure they're done safely. The group that I'm working with, there are two opinions. So a lot of the people I think personally don't like data centers, but they understand that they're going to happen. We can't stop all of them. So we need to make sure they're done safely and that there's some benefit to the community. So the legislation will do that in the long run. But until that happens, we're helping people write new zoning regulations and proposing them to their local city councils and county boards. And we're helping them start moratoriums. So we want to slow this process down. These are coming in so quickly that these elected officials don't have the information they need to make an educated decision on approving a project in their area. So we're helping the local activists work through their zoning processes. You have to know what your zoning process is in order to try and slow it down and to write zoning regulations. So that's why we're pushing moratoriums. A moratorium, an entity, a municipal entity or county can implement a moratorium longer than what they can just hold off on voting. I'm sorry, I'm getting off track here. So municipalities are required to vote on a permit application within a certain amount of time. They can't put it off indefinitely. A moratorium will let them legally postpone a vote longer than the normal process. So we're pushing for these locations to implement moratoriums that allows time for the Power Act to run through the process, the legislative process, and for the local municipalities to write zoning regulations. Kavi mentioned community benefits agreements, so I'm going to talk about that too. But so far, Aurora, Illinois, Godfrey, Illinois, Fulton County, and Champaign County have all implemented moratoriums. We're going to have a vote on a moratorium in Sangamon County in a couple of weeks. So the statewide grassroots organization that I'm working with, it's all local residents in these cities and towns. Many of them have never been involved in any kind of activist projects like this before. They're concerned about their homes. So we're meeting every other week. We're sharing research and strategies. So we're sharing with people how they can work through these processes with zoning regulations, how they can try and push a moratorium. And we're encouraging them to talk to their local zoning staffs. The whole permit process is complicated. It goes through many steps. So a business submits a permit application. There's usually a paid staffer, zoning staffer that will look at the application and make sure all the blanks are filled in. And then typically it will go through a regional planning department, which will look at the like statewide requirements for a process. So do they need any EPA approvals? Are there error permits that need to be filed? And then when that work is done, it'll go to a zoning board in whether it's a city or a county. And then the zoning board votes, but it's a non-binding recommendation to the city council or the county board. And then finally, the city council or the county board will vote on it. So it's important for people to understand that process in their locality so they know when they can attend meetings, when they can speak. So this is all what we're sharing in this local statewide meetings. We're meeting every other week. If anybody wants to get involved in that, I can put my email address in there and I can add you to our listserv. So I'm gonna stop with that and move on to what Third Act can do. So I will say the first thing you need to do is educate yourself about the project that's coming to you, the data center, this project that's coming to your area, and then educate your neighbors. You need to get people involved and have them understand the implications of these projects. You need to meet your city council members, meet your county board members. Talking to these people in person is really valuable. They will listen. They appreciate the input from the public, and they need to hear what their constituents think about these projects. Calling and emailing them is real important, but the meeting in person is especially helpful. You need to watch agendas for your zoning boards, watch agendas for your city councils so you can see when these topics are coming up, and then attend these meetings. Going to the meetings is very influential on elected officials. And then I would say follow Third Act activities. I mean, there's going to be more education coming from Third Act, and we need to all work together to understand this and understand the impacts to our electric rates and do what we can to make sure these projects are safe and beneficial until the legislation gets through. one thing I didn't mention was the community benefits agreement. So a community benefits agreement is basically a contract between a municipality and the developer. So the zoning regulations can talk about noise and lights and diesel generators. But beyond that, a community benefits agreement can kind of fill in the gaps on what the community needs from that project. So we have a 4,000 acre solar farm in Sangamon County who signed a community benefits agreement with our county. That included repairing the roads from the construction, so they had to fix the roads after the project was done. It included that the developer is donating $250,000 a year for 20 years to the county to be used for community improvement. So the community benefits agreement can fill in a lot of needs that zoning regulations can't cover. Zoning regulations basically are land use issues, so it's kind of limited in what you can regulate. But the community benefits agreements are very important, and I was really glad to see that in the legislation. So I think I'm going to stop there, Marty, and let the questions
Well,
happen.
again, that was a super lot of information. We have lots of questions. I think Catherine was going to try to start posing some. I do want to say, I hope you guys stay on because we have some information and some links that we're going to be posting later for you to sign up to if you want to pursue working on the data center issues. So let's start with the questions.
Do you want me to? Okay, just from the chat, and thank you, Kavi, for answering some of the questions in the chat. One question is, are anything to say about the Chinese innovations that supposedly use less energy and take up less space?
Yeah, I admittedly know not that much about it, but I have heard about it. Um, I think this is part of like I think it is to tech companies' benefits to use that kind of technology. Um, what I don't know is how expensive it is. And of course, like I think they should do it anyway. Um, I'm not sure how much of a say we can have in how they build, but because of the stipulations, for example, that we have in the Power Act that are directly related to their energy usage and everything, it is to their benefit to use less energy. It means that they have to pay less. It means that they have to build less clean energy, for example. Um, so it is to their benefit to pursue technology like that that will make them uh, use less resources and therefore benefit us as well.
Thanks, Kavi. Can you talk about who owns and builds the data centers and are they connected to each other within an industry or across companies?
Yeah, so the big companies like Meta, Amazon, Google, whoever else, they are the main builders of these data centers, but there are because like AI and the data center boom is becoming such a big part of the economy, there are new companies that have sprung up. One of the major companies is Cyrus One. They're the ones that built the data center in Aurora that I mentioned. So you'll probably hear their name a lot. In these conversations in Illinois in particular. So it is like mainly tech companies, but it's also companies that are now just focusing on data center development too.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I'll add to that. So ours here in Sangamon County is Cyrus One as well. In Logan County, it's Hut 8. And these are some developers who just build the buildings. They own the building and then they'll lease the space out to the people that need, so the smaller companies than the Metas and the Apples that don't need an entire data center to themselves. So there are the hyperscaler ones that have their own data centers, and then like Cyrus One, who leases out the space.
Okay. Um, do it if we if the data center deals that have already happened, are there tax abatements involved to attract them and is there anything in in the agreements that provides for what happens with the land once the data center, should the data center close or?
Lori, do you have a good answer to this?
Yeah, so on the land issue, so there is nothing that requires a developer to re reclaim the land when they're if the company fails. So that can be put in a community benefits agreement. And I think, Covey, you talked about that. The Power Act does have something in there about the developers putting something into a fund to reclaim the land, but there's nothing legally binding at this point for them to do that.
Okay. Is there a role for these small nuclear power plants to power the data centers? I think the question is, there's a concern that there's some enthusiasm for using the small plants for,
Yeah, small SMRs, small modular reactors.
yeah,
So the Power Act currently, the way we just define clean capacity or energy that is eligible is renewable energy, so like wind and solar, and then battery storage. We explicitly do not include nuclear in what is allowed. I think there is some back and forth in the chat about how much power, like political power nuclear, like Constellation has in Illinois, so that will definitely be a fight. And if you care about not building more nuclear here, particularly new nuclear, I encourage you to tell your legislators that. I'll also just say that new nuclear would be extremely expensive and also take a long time to build. So regardless of how you might personally feel about nuclear energy, it just if these data centers want to build in the next 2 years or in the next year or even 5 years, those nuclear plants will not be built within the same time span. So, um, yeah, this will definitely be a big topic of conversation during negotiations.
right. Kavi, does the bill require full disclosure of ownership of these? So they can't like hide behind all the, um,
Um, I think in I think because I don't know if we have that explicitly, but because they have to transparently disclose like when they're applying for a zoning permit and building permits, and they aren't allowed to sign NDAs. I think by proxy they can't hide their identity either.
Abby,
okay.
could you talk a little bit about the state of Illinois report that came out on predictions of not enough capacity, I think by 2029, and what that
Yeah.
means for rates? What does that mean for our electricity use in rates?
Yes, the resource adequacy study, I think is what you're referring to.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that was quite a, I mean, I think we weren't surprised by the results of that, but for context for everyone, the resource adequacy study was performed by the Illinois Power Agency to just do exactly that, determine if we have adequate resources, energy resources to meet the demand that we're seeing in our state. And frankly, what it found is that we don't have enough. Um, that is devastating for rates. That means that, our rates, like I said, have already gone up over the past year. And they'll continue going up because we don't have enough supply and just, basic economics, when demand goes up and supply stays steady, prices go up. So that's what we're seeing. And that is why part of the Power Act and part of this whole framework, across the country, honestly, is that if data centers want to locate, they also have to build because we don't have enough resources and they need to be part of strengthening our grid instead of straining it.
Yeah, thank you for
But
putting it in the context.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kavi, does the bill require any kind of building standards or? for the data center?
It doesn't, and I put a little bit of this in the chat, but I'll also say it that LEED certification is about the building itself. So it's
Yeah.
about like lighting and HVAC systems and when you're actually building the building, like what kind of materials are used. And I do think that's all very important, but in the grand scheme of a data center, that is going to be marginal compared to the amount of electricity that data centers of that the servers themselves use. And that is the servers themselves are not included in anything the building is using. Like you could put whatever you want in like a data center building. And even if that building is LEED certified, whatever is using energy inside of it does not have to do with the LEED certification. So no, we don't have that. Something to think about, but I think the bigger fight is the what is on the inside, the actual servers.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
I think Diane has her hand up. She's waving it.
okay, is there anything in the act or anything to say about the concern that, this is just a big bubble and there's going to be a lot of and there's a lot of corporate debt associated with building these out? Is there any safeguards that we can
No,
look to?
not in the Power Act.
Okay.
I think from like the Enviro standpoint for this bill, we are preparing for the assumption that this stuff will be built. Um, I think it is the responsibility of like municipalities and local governments to be careful what they're signing when it comes to these large corporations or small corporations or whoever wanting to build these. So, short answer is no, this act does not have anything about that because we're really focused on the climate and affordability impacts of this. But definitely, definitely spooky, I'll say.
Yeah.
Can I
Um,
just interrupt for a second? I see that people are beginning to use the raise their hands to speak because we have so many people on this call. We're asking people not to do that and to put your comments in the chat, and then people can respond to that.
Thank you, Marty. This, I think you talked about this a little bit, the injunctions, Lori. Can here in our state, can the court order injunctions on the data centers absent the act being passed?
What do you mean by injunctions? You mean to
To stop,
deny?
to stop the process, you know,
So from what I understand, city councils and county boards need to make their vote on a data center based on their zoning regulations. So they can't easily just deny a project because of public opposition. Now there are a lot of buts to that. So the black and white is they have to vote on the zoning regulations. So if there's nothing in zoning about lights, they can't say we're denying it because of the lights. But there are some legal cases that we've been given that people have been able to use that with health impact, quality of life. It's very difficult, but municipalities can deny on that. And then there is the option, there's a possibility that the developer can sue. So if they think that a municipality denied on grounds that is not in zoning, that voted